All right, so our next speaker is Dr. Paulette Stevenson, who began her journey at MCC as an adjunct faculty in 2009. As of today, she's in her third year residential faculty, and anybody who's been through the PAR program knows that that's a huge accomplishment. So congratulations, Dr. Stevenson. In 2020 and 2021, she was a Maricopa Learning Institute Research Fellow who was collecting student data on upgrading practices. So we are super excited to have her today to hear about her experience with student contracts that provide assessment opportunities to enhance student success. So I'm going to hand that right over to you, Dr. Stevenson.
Hi everyone, I'm Paulette. So my t-shirt says do no harm, and I think this will be a little bit of a theme for talking about ungrading. And so I am going to find my screen, actually my screen to share. Don't look at my email. Sorry, stop sharing. Oh, this is always the most nerve-wracking thing for me. Okay. Okay, I'm getting there. Okay, so I will find it, and there's a bar somewhere. Sorry. There we go. Right. So, oh my gosh, your whole screen share changes when you do this. Okay, so I want to talk about ungrading, but I want to start by framing this in terms of MCC. And so a little bit, there's a lot more to ungrading that I won't be able to cover here, but I want to start by making the case for it at MCC. And then I want to get into some of the practices, but certainly in the 10 minutes that I have, we won't get to all of it. So I want to start by a really big assertion that traditional grades are at odds with our college's mission, vision, and value. Specifically, I want to focus on the fact that up in Mission, we say that we create an inclusive and vibrant learning community where everyone is supported to achieve success. Traditional grades can pit students and teachers against each other, and then they value extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. So what that means is that most of our students are chasing that A versus chasing that learning. And I don't know that that's actually a supportive learning environment where students are trying to achieve success, because we would have to really think about how we define success in this environment. Most of our students don't say they want to get an A, they say they want to get a job, right? And to get that job, certainly it's about this degree and certificate and credential, but they also want that knowledge that comes with it. Also going to the vision. Our vision is that we inspire, ensure access, and empower action. And we're going to put a pin in access because I also want to go back to diversity. I want to skip down to diversity, equity, and inclusion. A traditional grading system does not support all learners. We are well aware that we live in a state with underfunded education program. What that means is that when our students come to us, they come to us with the inequities of the K through 12 school systems. And we can either deal with the students we have, or we can expect our students to be different. They are products of systemic oppression, right? And we want to try to prepare them to go on. And so with that in mind, I offer a different system of grading that does no harm to students. And so one of the things that I also want to talk about is who our students are should be central to our conversations about assessment. Our students, we are a Hispanic serving institution. Our students, many of our students are part-time, nearly half. Anecdotally, we could all probably share stories about our neurodivergent students who have a different way of processing the world, might take another couple extra days. Our students are also first generation students, nearly half. And so I think we have to really think about serving our students and thinking about assessment to match who our students are. a lot of research coming from the pandemic shows that our low income students of color, bilingual students, or students who have disabilities, tended to still receive Fs during the height of the pandemic. So some of the biases in traditional grading are baked in, and then continuing those systems continue to perpetuate that bias into our students, right? So transitioning into some of the practices, one of the things that I do with my students is I start every semester off with a conversation about grading. You can't disrupt old systems without talking about them. You can't you and being transparent about them. And I don't know if you've ever asked students about their experiences being graded, but what my students tell me, and it was actually really shocking the first semester that I asked them, that it sounds like trauma. So this student says, I had some bad experiences with grading from when I was in elementary till now. I think at times we, or at least I, have identified how smart I was with the grades that I would receive. And when I didn't receive the grade that I had hoped for, I would feel so disappointed in myself, especially when there is a class you are struggling in, but you are putting in the time and effort, but the letter grade doesn't reflect that. It can be really frustrating, and at times you just want to give up. At times you just want to give up. How many of you see your students struggling and you hear that from them, and it's really frustrating to hear them want to give up? And so I think this environment helps them match the effort that they're putting in with the letter that shows up on their transcript. We want to motivate students, not demotivate them. And this student, like, I've spent literal days on assignments with 3 or 5 questions on them, trying to understand, complete the assignment. And if it didn't have the right answers, the professor would give a bad grade. He believed you either got it or you didn't. And let me tell you, that was one of the hardest classes I've ever taken. All of these stories break my heart, without judging the professor, because we're all part of this system, right? Um, you want to care for, I want to care for these students. So I will offer that ungrading offers a suite of assessment practices that best serve a, quote, inclusive and vibrant learning community where everyone is supported to achieve success. And I want to highlight that supported. And so before I get into a couple of models, I want to distinguish feedback versus grading. So in an ungraded system, and there's multiple that I want to talk about briefly, you're really giving students more feedback than you are points. Points to a student, and I don't know if you've ever had this same experience, it's like a game to some students. Hey, Professor Stevenson, I got a 9 out of 10 on that discussion board. Can you explain why? Even if you've put together a rubric that's embedded in Canvas and the students are trying to go through it, they still want to know why, because they want that 10 out of 10 points because they think they did the work. And I myself have always struggled with some of those tiny, tiny, tiny little points. And it came to me thinking, gosh, like, what is that 1 point? And why wouldn't I just give it to student? What does that mean to that student? And what does that mean to me? It means very little to me, but it means everything to that student. And so this is from a high school English teacher. This is from Alfie Cohen's The Case Against Grade, which is a really accessible article that my students and I read at the beginning of every semester. And at the end, he says, the things that grades make kids do are heartbreaking for an educator. Arguing with teachers, fighting with parents, cheating, memorizing facts for a test, and then forgetting him. This is not why I became a teacher. I have a high school English, or I have a high school student, and last semester he went through a crisis, and at midnight one night he texted me. He was trying to write an English paper. His mom is an English professor, and he was in tears. He was struggling because that internal, I need to do good and I need to do wonderful, it just broke him. And it's really heartbreaking to hear from that end at that midnight. I know as teachers, we don't always get to see this student at midnight. But if any of you have students or have high school students or struggling students yourself, you've been there and you've sat with that student and it doesn't feel good. So how do we break this cycle? So one model is minimal grading. I don't use this myself, but it's a really wonderful off-ramp from traditional grading to something else. And minimal grading on low stake assignment is a way to help students gradually develop that intrinsic motivation out of their own curiosity and standards. So our students are often like, one of the things you have to do is like retrain students to not chase that A in some way, right? Because, or chase those points. So you're like, hey, what do you want to do in this paper? What do you want to see? You know, what's exciting to you? And you're really building up that intrinsic motivation. And you could start, and you could start with just an assignment and really kind of retraining your students to thinking not what is the teacher looking for, but what do I have to share based on the course competencies and the material we've learned. Um, and then something beyond that is you could also do minimal grading with like a portfolio project or even on grade undergraduate research. Another great model is contract grading. I do use this model in my English 101 and 102 classes. In a lot of ways, this is about a goal setting. So you and your students in the beginning of the semester develop a contract. There are already models out there, so you don't have to build from scratch, but I myself built from Asawa Nui's, and then I've completely modified it to be my own to some extent. Goal setting, growth mindset, the students sign up for an A or B contract like right at the beginning of the semester. And there's some intricacies here. So like I said, I can't go into all the details, but in a lot of ways, you're helping students develop a growth mindset. They've set a goal and they're growing towards it. You're checking in, you're giving feedback on so many assignments. You're just not putting points on it. A great opportunity to conference with your students, check in. How are you doing? How are you meeting? How are you meeting the contract? Where can I help you out? You know, where do you need more support or assistance? And then this is probably going to be about the most controversial in my humanities class, which is more of a discussion-based class. I call this reflection grading, but I allow students to grade themselves with a lot of sort of bumpers, I would say. The students are constantly getting feedback from myself and the other students, and they're reflecting multiple times in the semester on what's going on and what they're learning and what their process is. So the screenshot you have here are the questions that I use in my reflection essay. And quite honestly, the answers that I get from students are so awesome here because they're telling me, like I have nurses in my women in film class telling me that they're experiencing things in the films that they can't experience in real life to prepare them for their nursing career. Like, you know, understanding LGBTQ IA plus people, right? They might not experience that there. So they're telling me these really interesting things that they're learning, and then they're telling me, and I also should get this grade. And now I reserve the right to say, actually, you haven't. Like, so I'm still the administrator and I'm still in charge of the class. But honestly, what normally happens in this situation is normally I have students who grade themselves less than they probably should get. And so normally I'm actually emailing students and saying, hey, you gave yourself a C, and the reason you was because you missed like one assignment in week 2 of the class. How about we rethink that? And even those conversations with students are really enlightening to them. And in all of these systems, students feel like they have power. And so to wrap this up, what I will say is on grading isn't just about not grading. It's about examining educational systems that haven't served our most vulnerable students. Grades are at the center, but we shouldn't stop there. So some other things in an on-grading environment that you would have to also attend to would be course policies. If you say you don't accept late work, number one, are you understanding who our students are today? Because I know that all I do is take late work anymore. Not that I'm not holding them accountable, but our students are just so complex right now. This pandemic is still going on, and our students are still feeling effects. Inclusive syllabus language. How are we inviting students to their education as opposed to saying, hey, these are the policies? And then campus practices and services. We also need to look at our institution. Confidence and motivation for students. This is retention work, is what I would argue. If your student in English 102 can finally get the confidence to be a writer when they've been told their entire life they're a crappy writer, then they're going to continue taking classes versus English 102 being a gatekeeping function, similar to some of our other core courses. So anyway, thank you all.